Good evening. This is going to be a guide to Esiemo. I'm not going to go into too deep and to various builds, etc. I'm just going to go over his skills, how they work in conjunction with some mods, and some good weapon choices for him. I will say off the bat that Esiemo is never going to be the highest damage dealer. He excels in burst damage with hard to kill trash mobs. Basically clumps of enemies which are harder than the normal, and he can just wipe them out. Other than that, however, he's not a particularly good bosser. He doesn't clear as fast as Bunny. He's fun to play, but he's never really going to win any awards. So let's start with Esiemo's skills. Now, I'm going to go over to them in detail only because they do have some interesting interactions with each other and his transcendent mods. So, the first one is Time Bomb, which is a fire and tech skill. All of his skills are fire and either tech or fusion. So, Time Bomb, he can send out 5 of these, and they're just basically a sticky grenade. You can do them to the environment, you can do them to enemies. They explode after a short while, and they've got a fairly fast cooldown. His second skill is Blast, which is fire and fusion. Now, Blast detonates any sticky grenades that haven't already exploded. Now, when it does, when you manually detonate them, it increases the damage of each detonation by 25%. So if you've got 5 sticky grenades out and you detonate it, then they will each get 100% damage increase. This is quite a good increase in damage. It's a fairly short cooldown, 10 seconds. The issue with this is, however, that quite often someone else will come along and kill your mob before you've got a chance to actually explode them. And this goes the same later when we talk about his transcendent mods. This can be an issue. Third skill, Guided Landmine. This is essentially the same as a sticky grenade, except it sticks around for a lot longer, and it also sticks to any enemy that comes into its radius. They can also be manually exploded by Blast, with the corresponding damage increase. His fourth skill is Arcade Explosion. This is basically a charge, and then it does a sort of belly flop and explodes everything, as you can see from the animation there. This will wipe out pretty much any trash mob of any level difficulty that's in its range, and if you've boosted your skill power enough, it will take a huge chunk off of the dungeon bosses. Not so much the Colossus, but that's not really why you're using it. The main reason why you're using it is because you get a madness buff, and madness, if you can extend the duration, but its basic duration is 10 seconds, gives you a 25% firearm attack increase, a movement speed increase, and a defense decrease. Defense, not a huge problem, but a 25% firearm attack bonus for 10 seconds, and the cooldown on this is 80 seconds, but you can get it down a lot lower if you stack minus cooldown. But it's a good buff to have, and that's generally what you'll be using on the Colossus. Even if you don't hit the Colossus with it, you could just face plant in front as soon as you activate it, because you can manually deactivate it. It does a fair amount of damage. Other than that, it's not the most useful of skills outside of dungeons. His passive drops a bomb on the ground when your shield is completely depleted. This is interesting because Esiemo doesn't really, like a lot of the enemies, there's not really much point in putting a lot of shield on him. Sorry, a lot of the descendants rather than enemies. However, you can stack an absolutely huge amount of health on him, and obviously if you take the mods that reduce shield, you'll have a very small shield, but he's actually got quite a relatively high shield recovery. So think of it like shield gating in Warframe. So the cooldown is 30 seconds, but you can drop that quite heavily. and it is it's quite a powerful bomb. So if you get stuck in a group of enemies, which you might do because you've just charged into them with your fourth, your shield breaks, you get an instant drop bomb on top of whatever else that you might have put on them. So those are his skills. Now, to go back to the first one, there is the issue that if you attach skills to enemies, which is the best way to do it, is to attach them direct to enemies. If, say, your friendly neighbourhood bunny bounces along and kills them all, it instantly makes the explosive go off. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean you don't get any use out of blast, because that scales the better the more bombs you have active at a time. Now, as I said earlier, his skills are either fire and tech or fire and fusion. This means that when you're looking for gear, normally you'd be looking for things with modifiers to fire, tech, or fusion. However, the best of his transcendent mods is Cluster Bomb, which has an interesting and undocumented effect. If you put Cluster Bomb on, see its fire and fusion, save the changes, actually changes his blast to fire and tech. So now, actually, you don't need to worry about fusion, because the only one that uses fusion is your arcade explosion, and you don't really care about that much, other than the firearm attack buff for Colossus. You're not really using it to do damage regularly. The good thing about Cluster Bomb is when you use blast and explode all your time bombs, it instead now drops, it does the usual burst damage, but it now drops lots of cluster bombs, tiny little bomblets, which after a couple of seconds explode and apply a burn dot to enemies, which you can scale the duration of, and it's quite a powerful dot as dots go. And obviously, if you're only, as this is now tech, you only really need to care about stacking fire and tech skill power. Your arc explosion is still fusion, but as I said, don't really care about that. Now, let's have a look at some mods. I've put far too much catalysts into him, but this is where I've got to. Cluster Bomb. I use the Tonfa, mainly because I'm currently wearing the Panda skin, and a Panda using Tonfa is slightly better than some of the other weapons, but that's pretty much it. HP Collector. Cooldown 2 seconds. When defeating an enemy, instantly recovers 9% of your max HP. I have reasonably every mod that can increase HP on him. Where is it? Time distribution. There we go. So time distribution, skill cooldown, max HP, increased HP, HP amplification. Currently, his max HP is 498.1%. He is a chunky health boy. The max shield is down, so this actually takes very little damage to go through. You get the shield break message constantly. There are other things you could go. You could go with overwhelming HP. Really, I think I prefer the other ones, only because having some shield is better than having one shield, but that is also an option. So, more def and skill power, and that's it for his defense, and that it makes him incredibly tanky. He can wade through pretty much most waves of enemy fire. On the Colossus, if you're using resistances, then you just need to put, and I'll go on to his gear in a bit to show you why. You can swap out something like time distribution for a bit of a drop in HP and put one of the maxed out resistance antibody. One of the maxed out resistance ones on there, and then if you've got some resistance on your gear, you're basically all of the hard bosses. You can walk through all their elemental attacks. You can just face tank Pyro's fire beams. You can not worry about all of the poison, toxic stomps from Swamp Walker and so on. It's just, there's a lot of, he can take a lot of punishment. Because, as I said, we've basically skipped fusion. We can put focus on tech, focus on fire. These both have skill cooldown on them, and that will bump his skill. Emergency measures, which increases his skill critical hit rate and skill critical hit damage. And dangerous ambush, which is one of the better arcade tech mods, but there are some other options. So you could go for something like Technique Manual. Although you're stacking a huge amount of HP, I haven't found that even the 30% of the MXP is additional damage to target. This works on large amounts of trash mobs very well because it's 30% at the moment. It's about, I think it's about 45, 50 at max. It works against every target that you're hitting with your explosion. However, there is a cooldown of 8 seconds on that. Not fantastic against Colossus, but better than Dangerous Ambush. But again, if you're hitting groups of things, most of them aren't going to be targeting you anyway, unless you're very unlucky when you first set off all of your grenades. So that's pretty much it. In terms of other various things, you could use do a bump in fire skill power. You could use let's see, if you don't worry so much about the cooldown, you could use maximize power. I've generally found that I prefer to reduce the cooldown because it makes his grenades go a lot fast, respawn a lot faster, and then you can get a lot more explosions out. Now, there we can see the Panda. The works quite well, the skin on him, because he's a bit generic, let's face it, Esiemo. But the Panda skin still looks like he's a demolitions expert, only a demolition expert with a big panda head. Now, the weapon of choice for Esiemo is the Enduring Legacy. And the reason for this is simple. You are doing a very large burn dot on lots of enemies. And the Enduring Legacy has a unique ability where it increases firearm attack and applies a fire resistant debuff to enemies. There isn't a better weapon for Esiemo if you're relying on cluster bomb. If you're not relying on cluster bomb, so if you're using one of his other transcendent ones, then some other weapons may be better. But this is the optimum choice for that. Now, let's talk about reactors. Reactors, obviously you want an Enduring Legacy mounting because you'll very rarely be using anything else. Fire and tech. Now I've got skill duration and fire skill power boost ratio. There are probably better options on there. This is the best one I've found so far. Ideally, you would probably want some form of cooldown reduction and either or fire and tech skill power. Now let's get onto external components. None of the sets work very well with Esiemo. The issue for that is that a lot of the 4 set bonuses don't particularly work with his playstyle. Things like the ones that aren't geared towards specific descendants can give him a boost. I can't remember the name of the set, but there's one that gives you skill, crit, etc. But I generally found it's better to roll my own on his. And the reason for that is because it's a lot easier to farm individual ones. Now, if you notice, I have yellow or gold if you want, but resist on every item. This means when I do a hard boss, if I want, I can just put the relevant resist on there, like that, and then I'm getting close to 8k resist. It makes a lot of the boss fights so much easier, and especially if you're, because unfortunately for Esiemo, his optimum range is in the enemy's face, very close. You can go to medium range, but actually it's better if you're right up in front of them, especially with all the walking colossus, because then when they do aim at you, you can just dive between their legs. Now, 3.5, C, 3.5, D.5, D.8. The other ones, ideally, you would have better rolls for the other roll on here. This is just what I rolled with. But as you can see, they are also all max HP. So that's where we go for gear. And generally this revolves around setting fire to things, shooting it with the machine gun. Now, I can easily demonstrate the grenades. So you can look at the damage as they go off by themselves. Let's go again. And let's show you what cluster bomb does. Now, as you can see there, your cluster bomb burn ticks can crit. So actually, skill crit is a good thing to have. Still crit hit rate. So you get the initial crit. Now, ideally, you would be able to stack duration and skill crit and cooldown, but unfortunately, there's just too many stats to juggle for him. So do the best you can, but that's what we've got. Demonstrate the. You see, it's got a fairly big radius. You can make these larger. If you put them in range, they will automatically attach. Now you see there where the cluster bomb drops. One of the big drawbacks, and I'm afraid to use our old friend Bunny again here, if a bunny comes bouncing along and destroys your cluster bombs before you've had a chance to set them off, you don't get the burn effect. It's just, it doesn't happen, which is kind of annoying and is a bit of a waste, and it does hamper his DPS quite a bit because you are relying on those dots. And let's just finish off with the charge. So it has a damage, but it also has a physical knockback. And you can see I'm moving faster and I have a glow, and that's the buff. What you can do and this works on Colossus, is when you fire and reduce their resistance, the dot tick hits for more. And that's most effective on the Colossus rather than the trash mobs, which don't usually last long enough. There we go. So that's Esiemo. As I said, he's never going to win any awards for being the most damaging. He is very useful especially when he's using his the Enduring Legacy on bosses, especially if you have another fire-based descendant with you, either Blair or Lepic, both of whom will love you for reducing fire resistance and setting fire to everything. That's it. Hope that's been useful. Enjoy playing.